All right, I think we got this. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary McLaughlin. I'm a career advisor in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences, and I'm here today with Defei Shen.
Yeah, hi, I'm Defei Shen, and I'm working with the College of Education Abroad office. So we're here today to talk about, to try to help you learn how to market your education abroad experience. So you can talk about your experience and showcase what kind of skills you have learned from your education abroad and during the interviews as well as resume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many of these skills that you gain through the experience are going to be useful and relevant to a lot of employers. So we'll talk you through how to reflect on experiences you've had to kind of pull out the skills gained, and then how to articulate those on your resume and in interviews. So moving right along. How can education abroad contribute to professional development? So any thoughts from the two of you who are here on this one?
We get to work with people from like various different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and even breaking that down, just working with people in general.
Yeah, definitely.
Problem solving skills and collaboration, and then challenging it with the different cultures.
Yeah. So exactly, those are some specific things that you can do. So overall, you're just gaining new skills, right? And then through reflection in your study abroad, you can start to understand and explain how you've gained those skills. You can add then and articulate those skills and international experiences on your resume. So it gives you actual experience that you can then reflect on your resume. And those experiences in turn can help you with answering interview questions. So those are the pieces we'll talk you through today. So next is a list of competencies employers seek in college graduates. And we've also given you a handout, and for those watching it online, we'll make sure that it's available. The handout is available to you as well. But it just kind of talks through some of the key competencies that employers are seeking from recent graduates when they're hiring. So looking through, most of these skills are things that you might see or gain as part of an education abroad, right? There are a few that kind of stand out to me as ones that really have potential from study abroad. Working in a diverse environment, that's kind of a unique position with study abroad where you get to do that. Contributing to a team, communicating effectively is also going to be one that you're really challenged with in the education abroad. But all of these could be worked into an education abroad program or something that you take out of it. But really thinking through, what are these skills? What does it mean to say, I contributed to a team? And so we're going to talk through that a little bit more too. How do you break that down to really show how you're adding value then to an employer?
So basically, and as a follow-up to what Mary said, before you can really talk about what kind of skill you have learned from education abroad, you really need to understand those different skills and competences and what does that mean. And then you can identify, like, for example, when you talk about, okay, I learned the communication skills, but what does that mean? Like, what kind of thing show that you have learned the communication skills? So that's why we think it's very important to first understand the meaning of different skills, competences, and before we can talk about, okay, I learned this from my education abroad experience.
Mm-hmm. So one example that we'll kind of work through with you is this one, contributing to a team. So, and if you have thoughts, you can share. Just in general, when you think about contributing to a team, do you have thoughts on kind of what that means? What aspects of work or skills would relate to contributing to a team?
So like putting in equal effort or putting in as much effort as everyone else is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like respecting other people's opinions and efforts and what other people's ideas are, and bringing those ideas together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so if you're explaining this to an employer or there's a question that comes up around contributing to a team, part of what they really want to know is you're going to be coming onto our team to work with us. And we want to know how do you behave in certain roles? Are you a team player? Are you going to work well with others? Yeah, exactly. So those are great examples that you brought up. And then just as what we've kind of added to that is, so what are the roles of the team and how do each of them contribute to the overall objectives of the team? So like you kind of mentioned, that team player pulling your part, leading and supporting as the situation demands. So there will be times when in your role you're leading, other times when you're supporting, and that you can do both equally. And then when someone else is leading, helping that person to be their best, because remembering it reflects back on the group overall. Conflict resolution comes up more often than we might think sometimes.
Answer too.
Yeah, exactly. And thinking through what are the goals of this group and being able to build consensus between the group. So yeah, the ideas that you brought forth were all great too. So it's kind of thinking through what is this skill and how do I really break that down and think about, okay, what have I done to actually contribute to the team? How would I talk about the roles that I've played and things like that?
Okay. So actually the handout, I think a little bit description about, what each skills means, that's, we just give you an example, but there are a lot of different skills and competences. So you can read through and get a better understanding what each skill and competence really mean. So the next thing we want to talk about is how can you kind of really distill the skills, like unpack your education abroad experience, distill, showcase what you have learned. Now you have a better understanding of different skills. So what can you do next? Actually, it is, it can be done through reflection, which is, you probably are very familiar with that because you do reflection for pretty much all classes, I guess, and you probably think, oh, I know how to do reflection, Before we start, I want to show you this slides, and can you tell me, is this a reflection?
Like it just seems like they're just describing what happened.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So actually, believe it or not, I know students are doing reflection a lot, but still, when I talked with students who returned from study abroad, so what did you learn? And many times they would just tell me, instead of like answers through reflection, what kind of skills, they would just tell me, I visited a farm, I visited this factory, I had a lot of fun. We went to beach. Or some student may be able to say, oh, I learned the communication skill, like, learned working with people from diverse group, but they cannot really show they actually learned it through like specific examples. So that's why I think, it would be good to kind of visit what does reflection mean and how the whole process of doing reflection and help you get a better understanding of reflect. So you will be able to reflect in the future on your own, on like any study abroad experience.
You can just push the arrow.
Oh, okay. Good. Yeah. So first, I want to talk about a definition of reflection. There are a lot of like academic, related definition, but I kind of summarize, there are a lot of definitions. I summarize, make it understandable to you. So reflection really, it is a process during which learners revisit. So you need to think back, think about your experience, try to make meaning. And then as a result, you will learn something new or you will just reinforce what you have known, things like that. And the key point here is really make meaning. So how can you really make meaning of that? There are a few things you do to make meaning. So first you want to relate, because when you encounter a new learning experience, you already have knowledge, you already know something. So you first need to relate your new learning experience to your previous knowledge or experience. So for example, if you are a very strong supporter about the conventional agriculture, for example, because you have all the knowledge why it is so good. And then you went to visit an organic farm, which is a different experience, which is something different. And you may kind of struggling like, why do people do that? I think conventional agriculture agriculture is better, you know, things like that. So you need to, that's like you relate to your new experience to what you have known. And then you need to seek a relationship between your new experience and your previous. So like I mentioned, in this case, the student who strongly support conventional agriculture may feel a little bit frustrated visiting too many organic farms, kind of think, no, I don't think that's going to work, you know, for if you want to do like a feed the whole world, we need to do conventional agriculture, for example. So you kind of seek a relationship and find that you're frustrated, or maybe you're supportive for organic farm. You just find, oh yeah, you know, this totally, you know, I totally agree with that. So then as a result, if there's a conflict, you know, like you do not support organic farm, that's kind of conflict. And you need to seek solutions. How can I solve this conflict? And so that's the process. During the process, maybe I talk with people more, I learn more opinion from others. Why do they do this? Why this practice is working? And then as a result, you will learn some skills. You will learn some new knowledge. Or you kind of reinforce what you have already known about organic farm if you're a strong supporter. So still, this may sound very abstract when you look at that. You heard that, you know, I don't really get that. So I will take a further step and go through the whole process with you by using an example I had. Okay, I just want to show everything. So first you describe the learning experience. So I took students to China many, many times. And on one of the years, we visited Three Gorges Dam. It's a big dam in China, which was built later, I think it's around 2009. So it's a controversial, you know, topic about whether or not to build a dam. And then a lot of students going on that trip, they have pretty much everybody have very strong, like think of building big dam is very negative. Like it's not doing good to environment, it's not going good to like ecological, you know, it's not ecologically or socially, it's not doing good. Especially this project in China, they have to flood so many cities and villages, and they have to relocate like about 1.3 million people. So a lot of students went into, like even before they have this idea, you know, building big dam is not good, and because we had a lesson in the US. And so when they went there, they kind of feel frustrated, they kind of feel like not understanding, why do people do that, you know? But the point is like, you do not stop there. You do not stop there. If you stop there, you may walk away from the experience. Oh, the Chinese government, it's just not good. This is a bad project. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about anything. They just go ahead and build the dam, you know. So if you do not stop there, for our students, they actually try to read a lot of articles talking about you know, building the dam. Why did they do that? And also talk with local people. We visit that area and then just try to get some opinion from people. And then as a result, you know, they kind of find, okay, you know, there is a reason. There are some reasons, although maybe this is not that a good idea, but there are reasons. For example, China need a lot of hydroelectrical power for like the fast economic development, and also the build of the dam will kind of release some of the flooding problem. And even though so many people were relocated, and some people are very happy to like a government provide a new like apartments for them. So there are some good things there. It's not like all bad, you know. And then as a result, okay, when you think about this whole process, as a result, it's not like you walk away, think, okay, building, you know, dam is a good thing. Instead, the student actually are doing critical thinking the whole process. Kind of many students work away, think, okay, actually there's not a right or wrong. They're like this gray area in the middle. And also many decision-making regarding big projects are very complicated. It's not like very simple. You think, oh, this is not going to do a good thing. We're not going to do that. It's just, there's so many factors needs to build into. Also, they learn how to really respect the different ideas, as you mentioned before, like hear different opinions and try to respect other opinions, you know. But that does not really maybe change the idea, oh, we need to build a big dam. It's just really the whole process helps students learn different kinds of skills. And those are the skills, you know, you could kind of showcase. And when you talk with, you know, future employers, you can tell the story and then tell them the whole process, and then take a step further. You can tell them, if in the future I work for your company, for example, if in the workplace we have to work with diverse group team members. I will not just draw conclusion early. I will listen to other people's opinion. I will do more critical thinking, like step by step, think carefully and take different opinions. So this is just an example to help you see how you can reflect, especially many of you, if you're going on short-term faculty-led program, many times you don't have a problem to solve. You don't have a project to work on. Most time it's like you have experience, you visit a place, you see something. So that, I hope that's a tool to help you learn to kind of unpack, kind of distill, and then showcase what you have learned from your experience. Okay, Mary.
So from the reflection, you're getting sometimes a big story. You're thinking through, okay, what did I do? And as I thought through that process, what were the skills? And so Defei kind of mentioned one as critical thinking through the process of thinking about the dam. So then how do I take that and articulate it on a resume? So on a resume, it's a little different than maybe if you're given the opportunity to go to an interview where you can really talk out the experience. On a resume, you kind of need to distill it down to a few bullet points, right? So here I have a couple examples. The first one is of a more project-based education abroad. And so one thing I'll just note, if you're including an education abroad in your resume, which you should, because as we've mentioned, there are all these skills that you're gaining, but it's how do you position it, how do you articulate it? So you can, a lot of times you'll see students put it under the education section, which I've kind of done on the next one, or in relevant experience, you can put it. So depending on how you want to position that experience, you can decide where to put it. But either way would be fine. So for this one, we've had it under relevant experience. Again, it's a project-based ed abroad, and maybe this person wants to do community development work, so they've decided to shift it under their relevant experience section. So the bullet points are a little bit more what they did, kind of showing the employer, these are the skills I have based on what I did. So again, slightly different because it's more of a work-based or project-based, but notice that they're very specific and developed and carried out a sanitation workshop for 3 village primary schools reaching over 300 students. So that's kind of a specific, this is what I did. Led a team of 3 on developing culturally appropriate activities for sanitation workshops in collaboration with Tanzanian community development partners. So perhaps through some of the reflection I've done on my education abroad, I've really thought through how it was so important that I worked with my Tanzanian partners in developing those culturally appropriate activities. And then I'm just distilling it down into a bullet point for my resume. Assisted in data collection for a public health survey, working with translators to communicate across 3 languages. So again, through what I've done and some reflection, I'm able to develop these bullet points. And not just saying helped develop a project in a community, right? Being more specific than that and really distilling out some of those skills. Obviously, if given the opportunity to do an interview, there could be some more conversation, as kind of Defei talked about, where I went in with this idea that I was going to go to the school and just teach this workshop that I developed back in Ohio. But once I got there and started working with the community, I realized that some of the ideas I had might not necessarily fit in with how the school operated. So I had to work through that. And maybe those would be things that would come out then in an interview process where you could actually give the example of what you did in more detail. Then the next example is of, so you've got the education and then international experience, education abroad, human and animal interactions in Ireland. So here, this is a little bit more of your typical Ed Abroad program that's maybe not project-based, but more observation. So just kind of explaining that they were learning about Irish history, government, and culture as it relates to the use of land and animals. And then using that knowledge gained of how the history and government and culture have impacted why things are done the way they are in Ireland, using that knowledge to better understand what you're observing and to then compare to systems here in the US. So not just going in and saying, based on what I know, this is wrong, or because it's different, but really taking those lessons that you're learning there and incorporating that into how you're viewing the systems, and then using that knowledge to compare. So again, kind of in an example, when you're talking with an employer, it shows your ability to think critically about a situation, to not just take one stance, and to really maybe dig into a situation, do some research to have a better understanding of why something might work in one area, particularly as we get into more globalized economies. Having an understanding of how things work differently in different places can be incredibly beneficial to any employer. Even with communities in the United States, we know things work differently sometimes. So showing that you're able and willing to go this step a step deeper and really dig into things, and not just assume that one way is the way things are done, is really important. So kind of critical thinking again. So any questions about like including it on your resume, or how you might, where you might put it, how you might do it? Does it make sense how the reflection can really feed into how you display it then,
Yeah.
and really articulate it?
Yeah, definitely.
And it's very helpful when you use that reflection process, like I mentioned, especially if you don't have project-based program, you just visited different places, that will help you kind of develop your answers.
Yes. So now we're going to talk about interview questions using education abroad experience, which we've kind of touched on already, but we'll dig into it a little deeper. So have either of you heard of the STAR method? No? Okay. So we'll just break it down here. But kind of as we were talking about, within an interview, you have the opportunity to really talk about these experiences. So distilling it down to a couple bullet points on a resume, but then really telling the story when you're in the interview, or even at a career expo. So it starts with the situation. So describe, where were you? What were you doing? What was the task? So maybe it was observing farms, but thinking through, how did I do it? I did it through this lens of the knowledge that I gained of the history and the culture of Ireland, not just, look, I observed it. So the action then, so you resolved your maybe one size fits all view of how agriculture should be done to kind of encompassing more of the cultural and other items that go into how these things are managed. And then what are the results? The results are that you've had to think critically through the situation, and now you have a more open mind of how processes can work in different places. And then how does that skill and that ability relate to the employer? And as we said, it's in a global environment. This is a global company. It enables me to better work with people from diverse cultures, and trying to understand how their systems are set up, and that I can work with them in a more cooperative way. Something like this, right? So really thinking through, what did I do? How did I do it? What were the steps that I took? And then how could I use those skills for this employer?
Yeah, that's very important. That shows like, you're learning to learn. It's not like just, I learned from this trip, but then you're able to apply to, various situations. And I would say the STAR is a very, very good model. If you're better working with model, when you try to think about your study abroad, you use this one. Otherwise, what I described before, they're very similar. It's just one is more like a model, tell you what's going on, and then what's your task, and what do you do, and as a result. So you could choose whichever one works the best for you.
And for a lot of interviews, particularly first interviews, they're using behavioral-based questions that they're asking you. And a lot of times what they want is for you to use the STAR method to respond. So having a few examples in your back pocket of experiences that can kind of relate to a lot of different skill sets is a good idea. So then you seem prepared when you're in the situation. And study abroad can give you at least one of these examples. So if you have a few examples, maybe one is from an internship or work that you've done, but certainly using your study abroad, because it really does provide a unique example that you can use to show the employer your ability to think outside the box, communicate with diverse people, and we'll at the end give you the opportunity to kind of think through your own example a little bit. So practice time, but I would encourage you to reflect not just on study abroad, but on a lot of things. You know, if you're in an internship, reflect on that. Think through the skills and always kind of have this running document of examples that you might be able to use in an interview and add to your resume of experiences that you've had.
And it could even with like student club, you know,
Mhm.
leadership activity, you know.
Yeah, because a lot of times in your student organizations, you're doing activities that you might be doing for an employer, like fundraising, social media activities, things like that. Yeah, so all of those other outside of Ed Abroad are also really good times to kind of reflect and think through skills. So now we'll take this STAR method, and I've got a couple of examples of like an interview question and then response. So describe an experience in which you have showed initiative. So it's kind of a behavioral based question that an employer might ask. And then this one, during my education abroad in Spain, my language skills were quite basic when I arrived in country, making it difficult for me to get through the day-to-day tasks. So they're describing the situation. They were struggling communicating with people. I felt that it is important to communicate with people in Spain to truly gain the most of the experience. I thought about ways I might communicate that were nonverbal, such as using physical gestures, as well as listening intently and observing the situation. So they're kind of talking through the tasks they had to communicate. How were they able to do it? In addition, I took time each evening to study the language and practice speaking with our hotel attendant. So actions, they took some additional actions of not just observing, but really practicing and putting themselves out there. And then by the end of the program, I picked up more of the language than others in the group due to my focus on observing and listening to locals and pushing myself to practice speaking with them. So as a result of their efforts, they had gained more language skills. And now I would apply the same initiative to starting a position with your company. I'll take the time to communicate across departments to better understand technical components, which will be very important to my ability to represent the company as a field sales coordinator. So how something that seems like it's very different, being on an Ed Abroad in Spain, to working as a field sales coordinator where you have some technical product you're trying to sell, they've made the connection. That my ability to go above and beyond to learn this language, to really dig in and gain knowledge on the local community, helped me to excel in that situation. And I would do the same exact thing for your company to excel as a salesperson.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, because I just came back from a spring break to Costa Rica program, and I definitely see students having the skill. Like quite a few of our students have some Spanish language, you know, like a background, but not much. But they really are take initiative. You know, first of all, they want to show their respect for the culture, but they are take initiative to practice the Spanish as much as possible. We had a homestay, and then they kind of talk with, you know, their homestay parents, you know, all the time. And then we have a guider, local guider, who speaks English perfectly, but they try to practice Spanish. So I just want to let you know, it's not like many times people think, oh, it happens when I spend longer time in another country. It does happen in short term too. The spring break is 10 days, but I feel like a lot of students feel like their Spanish and understanding of the culture improved greatly through this trip.
Mm-hmm. And then also, like we said, through the other examples that were really more observational, through an interview, you can talk about those critical thinking skills that you came into the situation thinking one way, but through interaction with locals, observing, paying attention in your Ed Abroad course, or just listening to a presentation, you gained a different way of thinking about the situation. So something, you know, that might seem really simple and basic did give you that critical thinking skill. So another example is from the kind of project-based study abroad. So explain a time when you've had to work in a diverse group. So I worked closely with my classmates and Tanzanian counterparts to develop the sanitation workshop for the 3 village primary schools. I took the lead on researching similar programs being done in sub-Saharan Africa through groups like World Health Organizations. I then used my findings to develop preliminary activities for the workshop. I shared these steps with my classmates and Tanzanian counterparts to get input and feedback regarding cultural sensitivity and to ensure the activities would be feasible in our rural setting. So again, it could be that during this time, they really realize, wow, this is so important that I get this component of the local knowledge. The development of the program required multiple steps and much back and forth to ensure the activities were appropriate and would be beneficial to our audience. This taught me the importance of stakeholder engagement, research in developing programs for diverse groups. So again, that's what they learned, that's what they gained from it. And I feel these skills will be a great asset to your organization and assist with developing programming for farmers in both rural and urban environments. So they've made the link from that work that was done in country to the future work that they might gain with this employer. So I think that's the really important thing, is doing that reflection piece, thinking through what are the skills and what do they mean? How do I break that down? And how can I tie that to the needs of this employer? Anything else to add there?
Not here.
And then the next thing we have is really just for you to practice. So you have the handout that has different skills and kind of describes those skills, which should help you as you're thinking through, okay, what are some things that I've done? And reading through the descriptions of the skills might help you to kind of identify, oh yeah, I would say that that thing I did kind of relates to this skill. Now, how would I pair that into a bullet point for a resume? But how could I also then kind of use that example in an interview? So there are a couple interview questions, behavior-based, that you, oh no, too far. Yeah. So tell me about yourself is something that's pretty commonly asked in an interview. And while it might not all focus on your ed abroad, there might be some major skill or just something that really shifted the way you think that happened during your study abroad that you might incorporate into the tell me about yourself. And then, it could just be that you studied abroad as part of your degree program and it really opened your eyes as to how things work differently in other places, but how, taking time to understand why things work differently has really helped you in work that you've done now back in the States or your classes or anything. So I think incorporating that in is always going to be a value add to whatever the question might be. So tell me about yourself, and then can you tell me about a problem, either academic or work related, and how you went about solving it? So that's more the conflict management question, which can be difficult, but it could even be that internal conflict, right?
That's right, yeah.
Of, I thought this about the bridge, but then I went through this process of researching, talking to people, trying to better understand the system that led me to this resolution. So that's another good example. So I don't know if you want to take a few minutes to practice, or Dafay, do you have anything else to add to this?
I don't really, but I think like you mentioned that, all the things you mentioned very good. And I just want to re-emphasize, it's very important, not just that after you unpack your experience, it's very important how you connected that with the future employer, that application part is also very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So always, it's not just, this is what I did, this is what I did. Mm-hmm. This is why what I did is going to be giving value to your company, why it will make me a stellar employee. And that's the real connection that you want to make.
Mm-hmm. And then I think like before, interview or anything, like just the practice, rethink about, do the reflection, rethink about your experience and develop a few stories or experiences and based on what kind of skills you have learned. And then when there's behavior question comes up, you can always just jump in, tell them the story and tell them what you have learned.
Yeah. So you don't have to do it right now, but when you do want to do it, there are a couple of the questions here. There are more, and I can probably share with Kelly to put on your Carmen site, some additional typical behavioral-based questions. Kind of go through those and use those to kind of help with your reflection. So think through, okay, if asked this question, do I have some example from a time when studying abroad? And again, it doesn't have to be like white and black and white, crystal clear. It can be something like we've talked about with the internal conflict over how you felt about a situation. That's a great example of showing growth and knowledge gained. So thinking through those examples can really help you provide some excellent examples that will really differentiate you from other candidates. And that's what you want to do. Employers are sometimes seeing, 100, 500 resumes for a job. So what is it that you bring to the table that really sets you apart? And it might be that education abroad experience, because it's really put you in a position where you had to deal with diversity or even internal conflict. And how did you take that on? I think just going and doing that abroad really takes some initiative. You're putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, and it shows this willingness to try something new. But then what did you do with that experience? How did you really make the most of it? And how are you showing that to the employer? So I think sometimes that people say if they see, studied abroad in Mexico, they're just, oh, okay, you had a nice vacation in Mexico.
Right.
So how are you explaining that to the employer?
That's also like a good to help change the employees' kind of stereotypes.
Mhm.
Just like Mary mentioned, they always think, oh, study abroad. And if you don't mention a lot, like in your resume, it's just like spring break, study abroad in Mexico or Costa Rica, people would think, oh, that's just a vacation, And then because you did not pay attention, they would think, oh, you even don't think you have learned anything. So I think that's very good if you have those, developed, and then it's also good a start point for them. Maybe they would say, oh, so you have been to Costa Rica. Tell me a little bit about your trip, something like that. Open the conversation.
Yeah. And then because you've done reflection, you've really thought through the skills and how could I articulate those skills to an employer to show them that this wasn't just a vacation. I learned things that have really allowed me to think more critically and be more open-minded, and that's very valuable to them as an employer. So do you all have any questions about thinking about reflection or interviewing or even
I really
resumes?
like the STAR method. I'm very much of a diagram model
Great.
learner. I'm
Yeah.
just seeing things visually, and also like the slide that you have with the reflection, the process, and integrating that with the STAR model. So that I definitely want to sit down and work through.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. I remember like our first class, I think Kelly was saying, how was your study abroad trip? And a lot of people respond just by saying good or it was great, but we don't really know how to explain what we've learned and everything. And I think this will be really useful.
Yeah, we want to provide you this tool so you could use for not just education abroad, like Mary said, anything,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Useful for everything in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any kind of experiential learning experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even when you're in a job, sometimes we don't take the time to really reflect what am I doing? What skills am I gaining here? And if I, where do I want to be in 5 to 10 years? And how is what I'm doing now able to lend a hand to that? So I think it's good throughout life to always, when you can, take some time to reflect, but particularly when you're given these opportunities to go do something unique and different.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time? It's 11.
Yeah.
We have 15 minutes. Anything else?
I can't really think of anything else.
Yeah, I don't think so. Our resumes due next week, I think, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
So did that kind of make sense to you on how to include it in your resume?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
how do you prepare for the interview?
Yeah.
Right?
And resumes in general, I mean, there's different like ways you can format them. Is it just like job specific or kind of how you choose
A
how
little
you want
bit
it
of
to be formatted?
both.
Okay.
You always want to tailor it to the job.
Okay.
So that's why, for example, like one person maybe would decide just to group ed abroad with their education. But if you really wanted it to stand out, let's say you're applying for an international position, you might have like that specific international experience subtitle that you include.
Okay.
And then, if it was a shorter trip, but it was more observational, like we showed, you still have very valid and important things to include. So having a couple bullet points, but if you did a longer, more project-based trip, you might have a lot more to include. Just so think about how does this relate to the job, and then have that help you think about where you want to position it and what you're writing about the experience. How does that show that you've got those skills that are useful for the job? And sometimes they're slightly general, like just critical thinking. So that's gonna be useful for any job. But there may be some things that are like, wow, I learned all about this specific species of plant and how it's propagated, and that's actually really important for this particular company. So I'm going to make sure that I'm really identifying that on my resume. So it can be how you like it, but also a little bit about the particular job that you're applying for.
And sometimes when you reflect the story experience, like I mentioned, it could be multiple skills, multiple things.
Mhm.
You know, when you really unpack and distill, you will see, oh, actually, I learned a lot from that just one experience. You know.
And those are good things to use on cover letters and again in interviews. On a cover letter, it's great when you have you don't want to just relist everything you've ever done and everything you have on your resume. You want to pick like 1 or 2 solid examples that you can flesh out that have multiple skills that really show, wow, person has great communication, great writing skills, and maybe a couple other
Great
things.
teamwork.
Great
Yeah.
teamwork, yeah. And how those relate then back to that job. So digging through the job description and then using that to help as you're writing about your experiences or speaking about them. But yeah, Ed Abroad, then cover letters we didn't talk about, but using those examples in a cover letter is another great place.
Okay.
Yeah. And my office is here in room 100. So in terms of resume and interview stuff, that's what we're here for. And
Okay.
our career office is to help with those things. So, and obviously DeFay, I'm sure, is happy to talk you through the reflection piece if you ever have
If you're
questions.
interested, we can
Yeah.
sit down, do
Absolutely.
1-on-1 reflection.
Good.
But yeah, so if you're working on your resume and kind of stuck on how to talk about your study abroad, or if you're getting ready for an interview and just want to practice, you can make an appointment with me to come and do that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Not
I
right
don't
now.
think so. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
No,
Thank you.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just hope it's helpful.
No, it is
Oh,
very
it was.
helpful.
It's very
Yeah.
helpful.
Good. So we'll share the slideshow, the document with the skills and the explanation of the skills. And I will also give Kelly a list of some common behavioral interview questions. And you can use all of those as you're kind of practicing some of the stuff that we talked about today. And hopefully that all is helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Great.
definitely would like to keep those questions
Yeah.
in my back pocket.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have. So we finished a little early, but now you have time to go reflect.
Think about your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.